It's not, and I want to be able to tell them why.
Yeah.
There's a reason why.
Right, exactly.
So funny, you see some stuff about that.
I'm Hannah.
How to turn on the face track.
I was actually at the Mills Church, Methodist Church, working on
AI.
financially and suffering. So I came here during Lenten Luncheon and I started coming for a few Sundays and see how I liked it. Was like, hey, let's make sure. I really fell in love with everything here. I felt like I belonged. I felt like God was calling me to this church, so I joined this church. My religious background is a little mix of stuff. So I was a mix between First Free Will Baptist and Southern Baptist, and then a short Pentecostal phase. So my preconception was basically it was a whole guilt trip. I was extremely scared of the Book of Revelations, and when they started talking about like the rapture and stuff and all this other stuff, I was like, okay, you don't have to know the day when he comes. So I would say, okay, he's coming today, and then I'm like, you know what I'm saying? I was so scared. And the Book of Revelations is supposed to be a happy book for Christians. It's a book of hope, and that's how I want to view it. I want to heal my trauma from the guilt tripping I had from the Book of Revelations. I want to be excited. I want to heal that.
All right, if you guys would start finishing up, we'll come back to big group in just a minute. All right, so I'd love it if maybe you guys shared some themes from your conversations, especially around this last two questions. So what are some preconceptions about Revelation that might be in the room, and what do people hope to get from this class?
Well, I think what we discovered, what we talked about, and we have felt, is that we were taught, or maybe not really taught, but it was always implied to us that this was difficult, this was hard, this was dark, this wasn't, so when we say there's hope, how can you find hope? I mean...
Okay, so you were taught that it's a dark book, you should be afraid, don't touch it,
Right.
focus on other things. Okay, great.
We talked about what do you hope to gain. For me in particular, I had a friend yesterday I was talking with, and she says, oh, not the Book of Revelation. She said, that's scary, that really frightened me. So she can't even almost say the book, and I was say the name. And then I was thinking, this is not a large book. This is a very short book.
It's 22 chapters, yeah.
It's not like when you don't want to read something, you think that it's bigger and bigger, that would be an excuse not to read because it's too long. But I want to.
So it feels like it's got the weight of War and Peace, even though it's like a pamphlet. Great, yeah.
And then I think what we all want to get out
There's some reasons for that. We'll get into it later.
insight.
Yeah.
And we want to see about the hope and the joy. And I want to be able to go back to my friend and say, I have an answer.
Okay. All right. So you want to show your friend what for. That's a good reason to be here. Other things, that preconceptions or things that people are hoping to get out of the class.
I'll share. So I know we were just talking about this. So I grew up First Free Will Baptist, just in the Baptist church in general, and they love to preach on the Book of Revelations, and it was not it was more of like a guilt trip, kind of scare you to get things straight with yourself.
Sorry to interrupt, but so you mentioned Free Will Baptist. I always think it's interesting, in my experience, tell me if this is right, any denomination that has the word free in its name is usually quite restrictive.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. That's a good point. Okay, all right, so you went to this Free Will Baptist background and you felt like, tell me, and they were really into Revelation, and what did they tell you about it?
Basically, so I know they talk about the rapture a lot, and
Okay.
how that if you didn't have yourself straight, that you were going to be left on earth all alone, and all this kind of stuff.
Okay, so they really doubled down on teaching you about the rapture. Make sure I don't forget to talk about that later. Keep going, yeah.
So, like I said, it was a way of like getting straight, and I guess a lot of it had like a lot of dark themes to it, a lot of talking about the devil,
Okay.
that kind of stuff.
So it was meant to like scare you straight.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's a guilt trip.
Okay, interesting. Okay, all right, great. Other thoughts, preconceptions, experiences of the.
Yes. I've never really actually read Revelation, which is not.
And that's fine. I didn't ask you guys to necessarily read it. I said if you do, try to put everything you know about it out of your mind. If you don't, that's fine. But I also encourage people that if you do read it, it's good to read it out loud, even rather than trying to like study the words. But anyway, so you were saying you haven't read it before, but that's great. But you're still curious, so keep talking.
You mentioned weaponization earlier.
Yeah.
For me, at least, me being chronically online.
Chronically what?
Online.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Anyway, I think people online are like, oh, it's so prophetic that like, oh, some of these things couldn't happen. I think that's what you meant by weaponization.
Okay.
People are like, or they use it to scare people, at least.
Okay. You found that to be true in the online
Oh,
section.
Yeah, that's happened to me before.
Okay. Great.
We were talking about timelines.
I mean, not great, but I get you. Thank you. Sorry.
We were talking about timelines, and you were saying that you would like to know timelines a little bit better as well.
Oh, yeah, the material is pretty clear, although, like you say, I'm trying to wipe most of it out of my mind, so my preconceptions or pre-notions are just go away. But I think what is, I would like more clarity on is the timeline for the approach, the rapture, and then the tribulation and the 1,042 days.
Okay, so you're actually came with this like hope that you get a clearer sense of the prophecy of how the end of the world is going to play out.
Well, yeah.
Okay. I'll tell you, I might not help you, but you might figure out, but there's reasons why, but we'll get into that more deeply as we go into it. But that's good. That's a good reason to be here, and I'm glad to thank you for sharing, because it's good for me to know what's in the room. So yeah, excellent.
I think the important thing is to remember that in the end, God wins. The Holy Trinity wins. God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit win. And God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit want all of us to turn to that triune God and repent.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what the bottom line is. We all need to be saved, for lack of a better term. And that Jesus Christ did an incredible work that we could not do for us. It's a gift. And in the end, God wins. The devil loses.
So for you, the book of Revelation is like the capstone of like, in the end, it's going to be okay. And not just like okay, but better than we can imagine. And that is something that is beyond our control. Like we can't ruin it, right? It's something Jesus does for us, right? But the end is already been figured out. It's just a matter of making it that distance.
Well, and the fact that, it's a gift that you have to believe in Jesus. You have to follow Jesus, and those people who don't, it's not going to end well for them.
Yeah. So a lot of it's wrapped up in like your concept of the way that salvation happens through faith.
Faith is incredibly important.
Great. That's really helpful. Yeah.
I'm like Anna. I was raised in a Frequent Baptist church.
Uh-huh.
To Pure Baptist church, and then came to Episcopal church. But so I still have the background in me that it's a
You have had a long journey, right?
yeah. Well, it's I'm trying really hard not to need to be in all that stuff. And just because the guy is seeing all the different things that could happen did not scare him. My oldest sister.
So you were reading it like a story, like a travel narrative for somebody else, not as something that you were going to get stuck in the middle of. So you felt like a certain sense of detachment from.
Yeah, my older sister was like, "Oh, that isn't it a scary book?" And I went, "Not really." The first 5 chapters have a lot of strange things in it, but it didn't scare me.
It didn't scare you, but you understood that there were other people that were scared. Okay, great. That's helpful. So I didn't, there was something that I thought I was going to cut out of the class, but I'm going to bring it back in. I have this great theory about life, which is that there's 2 kinds of people in this world, people who love trust falls and people that hate them. Is there anyone here people who love trust falls? You know what a trust fall is? Oh, Tim, could you help me out for a second?
I have no idea.
Well, I know, but I just have to do.
Okay.
Would you come up here? Thank you. There's this game that was popular in the 80s where you would be like, Tim, I'm about to fall. Will you catch me? Say yes.
Yes.
I'm actually going to fall. Will you catch me?
Yeah.
Okay. So a trust fall, right? So there's 2. So thank you for everybody. Give Tim a round of applause. So that was a thing that was big in the 80s and 90s, like people do corporate retreats and all that stuff. And in my experience, there's some people that love that sensation, and there's some people that hate that sensation of falling and being caught. And I am somebody who loves that game. My wife is somebody who hates that game because she was literally dropped once. So here, how many, just raise your hand if you've played the game. Okay, great. Raise your hand if you enjoy falling into someone else's arms. Okay, great. Raise your hand if you loathe the idea of falling into someone else's arms. Okay, so we've got some more conservative folks. Thank you, Landon. You and I can hold together. The reason why I say all this is because remember when you're talking about Jesus does it for us? The book of Revelation is not, and I'm going to get more into context, but it's not really written for people who feel like they have control in their lives.
Right.
It's written for you when you are out of control. Which isn't to say that you're out of control for yourself, but it's like, it's written in a context, I'm going to get more about this, from people who have very little control over their lives. And what they had to do was fall in the arms of God. And for that reason, the book of Revelation, just like a trust fall, can be very peaceful if you believe you're going to get caught. Right? But it can be very scary if you don't. In the 80s and 90s, people used trust falls all the time in corporate training, stuff like that. And for the most part, they used them because they thought that it would increase trust. I don't think that trust falls increase trust. I think they just diagnose your level of trust, right? Which is a helpful thing, right? And in some ways, the book of Revelation is like that. It asks you to look at something far beyond yourself, to find a peace in what doesn't have to do with your proximate life. That's something that might speak to you. That's something that might not speak to you. But that at least is a big part of my take. I mentioned before that when I was asked to do this study, several people were like, I want your take on Revelation, which I thought was funny because I didn't lead anyone to believe that I had one. But that led me to think about, like, what is it that I can try to bring to this book, right? Because there's all kinds of resources. You can read Revelation yourself. You can get a lot of it. What is it that I bring to this book? And I think that like one of the things that the ways in which I approach the Bible is I think about it from what I call the inside out as opposed to the outside in. So an example of reading the Bible from the outside in is I go to the Bible, I read the Bible to tell me the rules that judge me or tell me what to do, based on what just the text says. A lot of people read the Bible that way. But if you've noticed, the way that I preach my sermons and the way that I think is most spiritually beneficial for the Bible is to try to work your way inside of the context and the narrative. What is the feeling? What is the pastoral? What is the personal need? What is the soul healing that is happening in this story? And how does that connect with my own experience of the world about me? And I found that when that happens, the passages, they just bloom in a different way. Some of you may agree with that. Some of you may disagree with that. But it just tends to be the way that I engage the Bible. So really, this is part of the reason why I'm having you guys talk to each other too. And I'm going to share a little story about my own life, about a time that I felt out of control. Because if you want to understand the book of Revelation, I think that you really need to find that place within yourself that needs to be held, that needs to be caught, that needs to be protected. That the book of Revelation, spiritual wisdom, will do best for that part of you that is able to let go and be caught. So, and because I think that the best way to get out of this book, to get what is out of this book, is to lay your own stuff in it. I think that's always true with the Bible, right? Is listen to your soul's longings, right? Like I said, I'm going to start with a story for my own. And it's funny, my relationship with Revelation has been long on its own. When I was in undergrad, I took a class in Revelation. I was in a secular college, but I took a class in Revelation. And honestly, I just sort of took it because I took a lot of Bible classes. And the thing that was most interesting to me was that the professor seemed to get at this the way that Revelation can be a source of hope and help in a way that I had never imagined before. And I remember him telling me about how he started studying Revelation because of how he saw how helpful it was for his friends who were dying of AIDS in the 80s, which was not what I would have imagined who would jump to the book of Revelation. But I remember and that sort of brought that. So once again, it's so fast forward in my life to a time when I was feeling helpless. I was out of college. I felt this calling to the priesthood. This was what I really felt driven to do. I got really sick. Many of you know I have Crohn's disease. It acted out really badly. And I found out I was going to have surgery, which in the grand scheme of things is not an emergency. But, you're in your 20s and you think, and all of a sudden you're I might not, I have to face my own mortality. And it's kind of before I was ready to do that. And it was confusing to me because, I thought I had this calling. I thought I was going to spend my life caring for God's people. And then I had to face the possibility that maybe, it's not going to be like that. And so I started thinking about all the reasons why I might have messed it up. I had this dream. It was a nightmare, really. And it's difficult for me to explain this unless you understand. If you've ever had anything that really is meaningful to you that you want to put your life into, this is how I was with this sense of calling to ministry. And in my dream, I found out from my surgeon that they had to remove my entire colon. That's where Crohn's disease is. And it was in the dream. It wasn't reality. It was like they had to return. And that, and in my dream, the Episcopal Church passed a rule saying that you couldn't be, that unless you had a digestive system, you were no longer able to receive communion. This is dream logic, but like this is the dream the way it is, right? And because of that, like I was never going to be able to be a priest or even be take communion again in the dream. And I remember once again, like searching myself for like, what is it that I did wrong that caused all this terrible stuff? And I was driving home from the job I had one day, and this dream was still fresh in my mind. And that sense of like, I don't know what's going to happen. I can't control what's going to happen. I should be able to control what's going to happen. Is this because I did X, Y, or Z? You've got this long list of like, is this why God is punishing me? And I remember getting to this red light, and I had this just like, there was a slight breeze, and I had this personal epiphany. I don't even know if this came from my own head or if God planted it in there. But I remember thinking, as I was trying to think of all the things that I could have done to cause this, I remember all of a sudden, like with the breeze, I had this thought, which is like, you don't even believe in a God that does that kind of thing. Like, you don't believe in a God that's like looking to smack you, right? And I laughed out loud at that red light because I realized it's true, I don't. But somewhere in my subconscious, that kind of judgment and self-rejection had seeped in and become the idol that had replaced the God that I actually believe in. I think that this kind of thing happens a lot. But I guess the revelation that I had in that moment in the wind was that God's ways are just a lot bigger. And the thing that God is doing is beautiful and beyond what my petty self-understandings are. And in that, I found a lot of freedom and a lot of peace. And I say all that because, to me, that is the place in which revelation hits the human soul. And it is the context in which it was written. I'm doing a lot of like lead up, just to let you know how it goes. You know that I've got a plan because I gave you the notes. But just to let you know, like the beginning is I'm trying to do some like personal stuff to help us engage personally with what's going on. Then I'm going to do a lot of context, and then we're going to spend some time with the actual text. So we are going to get to Revelation, but I'm just sort of building up to that point. But to encourage you to go through your own process, I want to have you go back to small groups for a little bit. I want you to share a little to the extent which you feel comfortable, and only which you feel comfortable. Do not feel pressured to share anything more, but see if there's something that you feel like you can share with this group, the small group. You won't be asked to talk about it in a large group, about a time or place in which you felt like completely helpless. Like life or death or whatever was just happening to you. And then I also want you to share in your small group sometime when someone said, it's gonna be okay, but they said it and you actually believed it. People say it a lot and we don't believe it, but sometimes people say and we do. So once again, I'd like you to the extent which you feel comfortable, share a little bit with your small group about a time that you felt out of control. And then share a little bit about a time when someone told you it was going to be okay and you actually believed them. Go.
Both are. Always want to grow up.
but it's a pastor different.
I'd like to encourage you to start wrapping up your small group conversation. All right, let's come on back. So I realize I just sort of opened a can of worms, and now I'm sort of stuffing the top on it again. And I want to encourage you guys to continue these conversations, both inside and outside. But once again, I'm trying to get to the core of the experience out of which Revelation was written. And I said that is a place of complete loss of control, but also a place where people really needed to hear it was going to be okay, and maybe even better than okay. And somehow, historically, we know that it worked. But I'll get back to that. So, Christianity rose during the Roman Empire. This is one of the first times in history that we had an empire, not just a king, but an empire. The wealth and the power was beyond imagination for many of the Jews and even Gentile Christians that started it off. Remember, Jews like Jesus and his immediate followers in the ancient world were not granted citizenship in the Roman Empire, and were tossed about without thought. They had no protection of law, and much of Jesus' teaching is about how to live in resistance without fighting back against that oppressive power. That became even more true after Jesus' death in a lot of ways. In the year 65 AD, there was a great fire in the city of Rome, the capital of the Roman Empire. And Caesar Nero, that's the boss of the Roman Empire back then, used a campaign to basically blame the Christians. Now remember, the church is real small at this time, especially by standards of the Roman Empire, right? Like, it's difficult when you live in Rocky Mount to imagine a place where, like, Rome is the biggest city in the world. Anyone want to guess how many churches there are? One church in Rome. Like, it's not Rocky Mount, there's two on this block. Right? Like, when they talk about when the letters are the road letter to the Christians in Rome, they were writing to the only church that's there. And Christians were extreme minority. I said something earlier when I said, before we came in here, I was like, the Eucharist was originally a potluck. That's true, it was. It was just a meal that the Christians would share, and they would call on the Spirit to be present with the food that they ate. And it's a meal that they would have every day, because every day you had to eat, and the only people that would eat with Christians were other Christians. It was an extreme religious minority, and it was a very convenient group to blame for this fire. There are some theories that, as it turned, that Caesar Nero actually had the fire set himself to burn down a section of Rome so they could build a palace. This is the kind of world, right, in which Christianity was born. And when the Christians were blamed for the fire, it got bad. Remember, once again, you don't really have courts or rules of law. You certainly don't have burden of proof. So the Roman soldiers, with all of their power, and the Roman leaders with all of their money sent out the soldiers to go and persecute the church. And by persecute, I mean kill. Christians were, and during this period, crucified. Now remember, we talk about crucifixion a lot, but it's about the grossest and evil and most painful way to die. Christians were crucified. Many Christians were burned to death, probably because they were blamed for a fire. It's interesting how history makes jokes about things like Roman candles and stuff like that, but this is where a lot of that stuff comes from, right? Is the actual overwhelming suffering of this small community that's trying to make sense of it. Good morning, come on in. I was just talking about a little bit about the context of the book of Revelation and the Christian persecution under Caesar Nero in the following year 65. There were a series of persecutions over the next 200 years or so until 313 is the year that it stopped. But once again, from like 65 to in the 90s, no, I don't mean the 1990s, I mean the actual like first round of the 90s, which is when Revelation was believed to be written. That's when a series of persecutions happened, including the death, violent martyr death of both Peter and Paul, both of whom were bishops of Rome. So right here in the core of the Roman Empire, you have Christianity being destroyed. Now this is a little weird for a lot of students of history that come along later, because the Roman Empire ends up becoming a big force for the spread of Christianity later. The later piece is important. So once again, imagine yourself living in Rome. You have no legal recourse. You have no protection. You decided to be a Christian, even though, like, you're not going to be popular. It's not the obvious choice. No one's a Christian because their parents were Christian or the parents' were Christian, because it's the first generation, right? Like, it's not just what you do. It is this profound choice that you've made that's isolated you from your friends and from opportunities in order to serve in, by the way, also because of the church's stance on pacifism. The early Christians were very pacifistic. They did not believe in violence or war. So they did not allow members of the church to serve in either government or the military, which can also give you an idea of how little influence we wielded, because they believed that if you were a soldier, you'd have to kill somebody and you'd be subject to that sin. If you were a governmental official, you might have to order somebody to be killed, and then you'd be subject to that sort of thing. So they thought of it as an unchristian thing to serve in either the government or the military. Also, if you were a school teacher, you'd have to teach the Roman gods in school, so you weren't allowed to be a school teacher either. Once again, I'm trying to give you a picture of how apart Christianity was at the time. And part of the reason why I do this is because think about how personal the losses would become. Like, these are your friends, your mentors, your heroes, the people that sent you through the toughest things in your life that you're seeing burned to death in front of you. I don't mean to like scare you, but later when we talk about the violence that's in the book of Revelation, I'm sort of setting you up to be like, their life was already violent, right? Like, and was already traumatic. And so the existence of violence in the way that someone tells the story of their future is not profoundly different than the way that they would tell the story of their present. which I think is another sometimes barrier for people who live in relative security when we try to read the book of Revelation. We don't know how to step out of that, right, into this understanding that war, death, and persecution was a daily way of life. Now, that's not to say that the Christians were persecuted every day. It would sort of come and go based on the will of the powerful, right? But that meant that you were always, if you were a Christian, you're always kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And by shoe, you mean like gruesome, awful, torturous death. I mean, I don't mean to put that, like, I don't know how to put that in a way that's not like, that's not sufficient, too heavy and not too light, right? But this is the context in which the revelation of John came, is when these people, now, it doesn't say this necessarily in the Bible. This is my own sort of read. But usually when I've seen people and they have been hurt on a personal and independent level, I usually find the natural response for most people is vengeance. Right? You kill me, I'll kill you. Right? After 9/11, the President of the United States at the time literally said, this calls out for vengeance. Once again, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm judging his response, because I'm not. But I thought that was interesting, because the President of the United States at that time also said that his favorite political philosopher was Jesus, who talked about loving your enemies and never turning out in revenge. And yet we have this, and yet when it became 9/11 and when it came down to it, I don't think he was wrong. He was talking about the way that America felt. And much of America did call for vengeance. It was a confusing time. And probably the most parallel time in my life to what, like this idea of like, oh wow, I thought we were safe, I thought things were under control, but no, who knows when fire is going to rain from the sky. And the people that we care about and the people that we know and the people that we love might be in horror. Like, what I'm getting at is whether or not you were persecuted as a Christian in the early century, in the first century, you were traumatized by the persecution, right? Like, that's something that you live with because of the fear and the presence of it. So what I find when I read the book of Revelation, the biggest theme that comes back over and over again, and you'll read it and you'll make your own decisions, but I find that the biggest theme, especially for the first 20 chapters, is hold on, stay faithful, don't fight. God is the one in whose hands the vengeance is, not yours. Right? So if there's violence, pay attention to where the violence is coming from. And I just reread the whole thing. I didn't see one case of the faithful picking up the sword. You might have these grand forces of the divine, but every time the message to God's church in the midst of it is hold on, stay faithful. The vengeance belongs in God's hands, not yours, which is difficult because, like, people want mercy and we also need justice. But people are not capable of figuring out the right balance of those things. And so in the book of Revelation, when you start seeing the violence, I just want to encourage you or your friend to start thinking about, like, what is the life of these people like? How dramatically different is what they're writing? And what is it, and if they put themselves in the narrative, right, like your sister, like you said your sister did, it's scary, that's fair. But if you put yourself in the narrative, you're putting yourself in the narrative where? Not as the four horsemen of the apocalypse, nor as the guy who gets hit by the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but the faithful that are holding out and sometimes live and sometimes die, but make their way through this very difficult time that is the birth of something incredible and new. The world is so messed up in the book of Revelation that not only does earth have to be destroyed, heaven is destroyed too. That's how bad things have gotten from the perspective of the faithful. Now, for a second, I want you to imagine you're one of those Christians, and some dude comes to you with a story about getting an elaborate vision of all of this stuff. Now, I also want to point out, like, never underestimate how much the early church thought the end of the world was coming tomorrow, right? Like, and it was proximate, it was close. Jesus even says, this generation will not pass away before these things happen. Everyone believed that this was not going to continue for another 2,000 years, right? It's coming at the heels. Now, if you think that the end of the world is coming in the next 20 years, if you're lucky, like, or not lucky, if you're whatever, if you think the end of the world's coming any time, are you writing down? Like, it's expensive and takes time to write down a whole vision. Are you going to sit down and write and recopy this vision if you think that it might benefit somebody in 2,000 years? No. The people who heard this and copied it and shared it heard it for the same did it for the same reason that every part of the scripture is written, which is not for some like long time Easter egg historical record. It's because it's life and death to them now, to their now. They're not writing things to make predictions about a far-off future. They're trying to get through the day. And once again, it's like context. I think sometimes when we come to these texts, we are tempted to read them outside in and see, what is this thing saying to me, as opposed to going inside and then saying, okay, what did God do for these people, and how does that show me what God's doing for me and for us and for all of creation? Okay. Any reactions to that so far? Questions, thoughts? Context of persecution. Huge in understanding the book of Revelation, in my opinion. The point of the book of Revelation, the reason why we remembered it is and we continue to copy it down, is because it helped us get through a time in life that was unbearable. But yet we bared it. And somehow, miraculously, ended up on top of the world. Or at least, kind of. So, once again, a few random things about Revelation. It was written in the late 90s. It was written by a guy named John. We know that from the text. He identifies himself as John. Most scholars believe that it is not John the Evangelist, nor John of the epistles, nor the John that was around with Jesus, but yet another John. They call him John of Patmos. So his name's John, but don't make assumptions that everybody named John is the same John. Now, the context of persecution also might be a reason why some of the information might seem coded, right? Because that's something that a lot of people have sort of approached the book of Revelation, is trying to tell you all these things in metaphor and code that you try to decode and figure out so you can, for a variety of reasons. There is information that I think there's good reason to believe that is in the book of Revelation that was designed to be coded. but probably not anywhere near as much as you might imagine, or at least that's my own personal argument that I'm going to make. But I will give you one example. So, and this also speaks to, remember earlier I said the people who read the book of Revelation, the people who copied the book of Revelation, the people who wrote, they thought it was about their life. They did not think it was about life 2,000 years from now, okay? And one thing that I'll point out to support that has to do with what's called what is often referred to as the number of the beast. What's the number of the devil or the beast in Revelation? 666. That's what most people will tell you. There's actually, not every copy has that number being the number that is the number of the devil. There's a different number that's also. It says in the passage that it is connected to a person and that whatever. If you take the letters of Caesar Nero's name and you add them together, you get 666. If you take the letters of Caesar Nero's name and Caesar Nero's name with a common misspelling of his name in the day, you get the other number that is often found in the text. So that doesn't necessarily tell you that John thinks that the beast he's talking about is Caesar Nero, but somebody who copied the thing down certainly does, right? They're trying to point straight at the person who is persecuting them then, right? That's probably very different than many of you, that approach is probably very different than many of you have heard in churches in the past, but these are just some facts that I think are meaningful, that once again draws me to try to read the passage inside out rather than outside in. Some other, where was I? Some random things about Revelation. The Bible shows a chronology. This is also just facts about the book of Revelation. The Bible shows a chronology of human history, but it isn't necessary. But it isn't beginning to end necessarily in the Bible. There's a lot of apocalyptic literature that talks about the end of the world, but it gets worked in different places. So a lot of times we think of Revelation as the conclusion of the Bible because it's in the end, like where it's placed. But it's not, but for what it's worth, the book of Revelation was not placed at the back of the Bible because it is about the end times. It was placed in the back, fun fact, it was placed in the back of the Bible because when they were trying to decide which books counted as the Bible and which books didn't, that was a whole thing that took centuries. People fought and died about it. When they're trying to decide which books of the Bible, or which books counted as the Bible and which didn't, the book of Revelation, they were the most on the fence about whether they should include it, and so they put it in last. That's how it got to be there. Now, I do think that there's a certain beauty to the way that the Bible's story works, but just to be aware, like that's the reason why it's last. It's not last because it's supposed to be the final word, or was designed to be the final word. It's last because this book that already existed, because no one sat down and wrote the Bible. It's not just one person. It's different books written by different people who didn't talk to each other over time, and then we gathered to get them together over time. Right? So, and in fact, early Christians didn't read out of a bound book. They had scrolls, right? And so they pull out, just like you might pull off your shelf. I've got, here's Isaiah. Here's the Gospel of Thomas. That might be a gospel you may or may not have heard about. It didn't make the cut. A lot of the early Christians read the Gospel of Thomas in worship, but it didn't make the cut ultimately for reasons I think that are good. But I'm doing this on purpose, right? It's not, the Bible didn't fall out of the sky. We decided these are the books that we're going to call the Bible. And by we, I mean the church. Okay. Other reasons why Revelation, I think, can be challenging to contemporary Christians. It says directly that it's a religious vision, right? John says, I was caught up in the Spirit, and then I saw these things. And then he writes them down. It says that directly. Now, religious vision is something that I feel like is kind of taboo nowadays for a lot of people. You know? And I think it's because of, I think it's because ever since the psychiatry was invented, we're all afraid we're crazy, right? You know, but religious visions even now are common. I talk to people that have religious visions regularly. My guess is each of you probably knows several people that have had these profound religious visions. None of them may have told you about it because they don't want you to think they're crazy. And it is true that there is religious delusion, but there's also religious vision. There's a huge tradition around that. And when people come and they talk to a priest about that, one thing we don't do is say, you have to figure out what this serpent means. Right? Like, when people have religious visions, it's more about the context of how it draws them into the connection with God and less about the specifics of what happens. Like, when you work with people who have mystical visions, we call them mystical visions because we can never completely figure them out. Which means that if Revelation is a mystical vision, John probably didn't even know what most of it meant. So if you think that you or I or some other pastor locked away in his back in his office is going to figure out all the ins and outs of it, it ain't going to happen. And I say this because I don't think that Revelation is designed to be one big coded message. I think that it is revealed in order to give us an experience that allows us to teach, that teaches us how to be faithful in the presence of complete lack of control and how we rest in God. And I think that because that's what happened to the early Christians. If they had tried to fight back, we would not be in a church today. We would be in something else. We certainly wouldn't be talking about this text because they would have been wiped out like that. It was their faithful and passive resistance to persecution that caused the church to grow and the gospel to spread. And this story works, or this vision, as it is articulated, works to teach us how to hold on even in the midst of a lot of twists and turns, or at least that's what I think. But it's once again, it's difficult, I think, for contemporary Christians to wrap our minds around that because we're not necessarily used to talking about mystic visions outside of the clergy and monasteries. Like if you ever want to figure out, you talk to some people, those are the places that you go to if you want to figure out what those conversations are like. If you haven't already had visions yourself or known people that have had visions, those kinds of things. I think also another reason why Revelation is difficult for Christians to read now or connect with now is I think that most Christians nowadays are a lot more self-conscious about their faith. One of our biggest questions is, am I really a Christian? And for some of us, because of how it was weaponized, is God going to send me to hell and do I deserve it? But in the year 65, did you wonder whether or not you were a Christian? No, because you had dinner with Christians and they were going to kill you for it. Like at no point were you like, do I count? This book is written in a context where it's to be read by people who are not like, which one am I in the story? They know they're the faithful. And they're trying to stay the faithful. Right? When I was working on this section, I was listening to the Wilson Phillips song, Hold On repeat. Because that is what I think, especially the first 5 or even 20 chapters of the book of Revelation, is designed to do for the believer, despite the grandiose imagery and powerful imagery. Also, when people say that the book of Revelation is violent and confusing, I feel like you would, I feel like just try to use the same kind of interpretation for how you look at a Marvel hero movie, right? Like, have you ever tried to explain the plot of an action movie? It's impossible, because you're like, this happened, and then there's this weird thing, because there's always something happening, right? This is before action movies, and in some ways, this is the way that came out, right? Like, this is an action. There's one thing happens, and another thing happens, and another thing happens. It stacks action upon action upon action, because that's the way life is when you're living on the edge, which they were. But also because that's the way the storytelling works sometimes. You know, it's the book of Revelation is taking you on this elaborate journey, which is teaching you to hold on when you don't understand what's going on. So it kind of makes sense that the narrative itself doesn't seem to make sense, because it's trying to help you hold on, to train you in what it's like to stay fast and firm in the process of that, of those ups and downs. So getting back to the sort of overall concept, it's a very different, one other thing about one of the reasons why I think it's difficult for contemporary Christians to read the book of Revelation, especially in America. Somebody give me an example. Somebody tell me, can you think of a movie in which there was the fear or threat of the end of the world that you've seen recently?
2012.
2012. Okay, so what happens in 2012?
There's like a catastrophe, and essentially the United States of America has like 7 ships that they call arks, and they put as many people on as they can, and they send them out, and there's a humongous flood like Noah, and they try and do the best they can with what they have, and finally at the end they find land or something, and they all look up and it's good at the end. Life continues.
Okay, so there's this calamity, and they try to escape and find a land of promise. Great. You see where I'm sort of getting at some of this stuff. So what looked like the end of the world was narrowly avoided by the wit and resources by a small remnant of people. Okay, great. What about other action movies like this is not recent, but was it a Will Smith one with the aliens? Independence Day. Yeah, right. So Independence Day, aliens come to destroy the world, right? There is this really powerful scene in which they destroy the White House. I remember being in the theater and being like, they're using the symbols that already matter to us, right, in telling this story. And the end of the world is coming because the the aliens are going to kill us all, but we're saved by the heroic patriotism of a couple of people, right? We get to close to the end of the world and it is narrowly averted by the heroic work of someone. This is the way that story after story after story, movie after movie after movie, we hear and see in our culture. The end of the world is a threat that is narrowly averted over and over and over again, and thank God it didn't happen. That is the opposite of the book of Revelation. The end of the world is the thing you're trying to get to. I think sometimes it's difficult for us when we get in the world, because you see this like end time stuff, and we're patterned by all of the rest of our storytelling to believe that that's bad. But in the Bible, it's actually the other way around. What's bad? Right now. Because Christians are being lit on fire and crucified, and the empire is on top. Like, we tell those stories about narrowly averting the end of the world are the kinds of stories that you tell from a position of power and privilege. If you like the way your life is, you tell a story about how the life almost got taken away but didn't. If you disdain the way the world is, you tell a story about how everything is put right by a power that is beyond yourself. So once again, and then you start thinking about the rest of the scriptures. What is the kingdom that they long for? It ain't Rome and it ain't the United States. It's God coming in firsthand and making the kingdom of God happen. How is that going to happen? Well, every other change in political power has been pretty darn bloody in history. So your imagination is going to be there, but also the way that, once again, this experience that, and once again, this is a spiritual experience that John says that he has and he writes down. He doesn't tell you what it's supposed to mean, and he doesn't tell you you're supposed to figure it out. I think it's interesting too, because, and this is why I sort of apologize when there's someone who's saying like they sort of want to know more about how the end of the world's going to shake out. You know, a lot of people have approached Revelation to do that, and try to like figure out this is the plan, this is how it's going to go, and I'm going to be ahead of the game. But I would just point out that what did Jesus say about the end of the world? It will come like a thief in the night. You're not going to be expecting it, which means Jesus didn't say, if you read scripture carefully enough, you'll know the game, right? And you'll be ahead of it, right? No, the Bible is not designed the Bible is not designed in order to have you not to have faith because you have certainty, because you have the game plan. It's designed in order to give you the faith that you need to live in connection with God and to make a home with God, regardless of what the world does or doesn't, right? So I think one of the reasons why Revelation can be frustrating is because we're trying to figure out what all these things are. So take this as a license to try to figure out anything. Like, this is why I told you, like, try to put it all aside and just read it and experience it. Because that's what you do when you watch an action movie. It's the feeling of it. After you leave, most people can't tell, I mean, other than Michael, most people can't tell you the lines of the plot, right? But they can tell you that they liked it. Why? Because they felt something in this process. Okay. And so that is sort of what I'm getting at of like that's what it means for me to read the book of Revelation from the inside out. To like let go a lot of the trying to figure out how it's coded. There's some things that were probably coded. John probably didn't know most of them. And even if he did, the Romans couldn't figure it out then. We're not going to be able to figure it out now. The book of Revelation is here for us now to experience in the presence of the Holy Spirit, to see what it does for our souls, not to try to have us game plan, not to try to have us, like I said, get ahead of the game or game the system on the end of the world. It's designed to train us to make our home with God and what that's like in the world now. And through all of the ups and downs, the terror and the trauma that may come, right? It's training us to be able to hold on to our spirituality in the midst of that. All right. That's sort of the first section, which is all the intro material. Are there any thoughts, questions, or things that people want to bring up right now? Yeah.
I just have to say, do you remember the book of 1984?
Yes.
I'm, cause you know, Frugal Baptist, so everybody's running around going, oh my God, and I'm like, you can't count on the book because Jesus said it would come in like a thief in the night. So you
Yeah.
can't count on 1984.
You can. I mean, and 1984 came and went, right?
And then when they were saying similarly to the year 2000, I was like, yeah, I can't count on what we're saying. It's
I mean, maybe.
get ready all the time.
Or stay ready all the time. Stay faithful. It is each day. Yeah, that's how I take it. No, thank you. Other thoughts?
One of Paul's letters that we're going to read this weekend.
Sure.
Well, tomorrow. And it's how we've been reconciled to his fleshly body through death so as to present ourselves holy and blameless and irreproachable before him, provided that you continue securely established and steadfast in faith.
So it is this. So once again, Paul is urging the early Christians. Paul's letters are older than the Gospels for the most part. Paul is urging early Christians to do exactly the same thing that I'm talking about. Hold steadfast in the midst of this very difficult time. Great.
Be careful, brother.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions before we take a break?
You know, you bringing up the fact that people will try to sell a formula and say it's going to be here now. It reminds me a lot of, not everyone this way, but a lot of the older generation, I would say probably like between like late 60s to their 80s, are like, well, it's coming, be prepared, be prepared. And my grandmother, you know, she'd be like, you know, it's too bad you're not going to live to be an older person because this thing is coming and the world's going to end. Sorry. I'm like, okay.
And I mean, maybe they're right, maybe they're not. But people have been saying that for 2,000 years and it hasn't come yet, right? So, and that leads me to believe that it's not about figuring out when it comes, but rather living a life that is devoted to this greater hope, right? My hope is that each and every one of the souls that God puts in my care, when Jesus comes again, will be like, oh, so it's now? Like,
Can I finish my pizza?
I mean, no, because it's better than pizza. Like, this is what I don't understand how to explain. It's better than pizza. But getting back to the whole thing, it's like living a life of acceptance and letting yourself be held through through sometimes very traumatic and difficult things. Learning to love the trust fall, which is the book of Revelation. And this is, to me, is a real thing. The book of Revelation is for the broken. It's not for the breaking. Like, there are some parables where Jesus is trying to break your perspective. But the book of Revelation isn't designed to scare you into behavior. It's designed to reinforce you in the commitments that you've made. Or at least that's the way it worked in the first century. And I think that as we read it now, it's useful to try to step into some sense of that. Rather, if we want to be true to not just what the Scripture says, but what the Spirit does through the Scripture. Great. I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes, bio break, whatever, and I'll see you back in a bit.
Let me show you this quickly. I really like this version.
Oh, the chronological Bible?
Yeah, have you ever read this? Or seen it?
No, but I know of it. Yep.
Okay, I was just, when you were talking about the things that weren't included, he also does that.
Tries to put historical
And
context.
talks about the historical interlude and says these things that weren't included in the Bible. And I thought that was really neat, in that there's a lot of stuff that he mentions that we don't see. But and just saying what you read.
No, yeah. And I'm going to get into a lot more of the shape of history according to the Bible in the very end of this class today.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to have a sort of like experience revelation, then we're going to circle back to try to really see the beauty that happens in the, because to really understand how gorgeous chapters 21 and 22 are, you have to kind of see the whole picture of the swath of Scripture. So, yeah.
And understand. I like the it feels. I think John was one of the luckiest people on ever to be a recipient of this vision. And I always thought Gabriel had the greatest job in the world to deliver some of the things he's delivered.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I had thought about it actually. I did, but